traditional family, and when I was kid, my father, they are very traditional, and I'm not so sure whether you have heard of that ancient tradition, ancient tradition. Okay, can you speak Tibetan? Okay. Ancient tradition, especially it's called the Nyingma tradition. Okay, my family that belongs to that tradition. Centuries, they are following that tradition. And when I was kid, sometimes in my family, they are not very happy with me to studying the philosophy and the debate. But when I was kid, I really like to study the debate, but they don't like it. They always say the one thing that the funny thing is that say that what you are studying is merely just a wood. It will not lead me to the Buddhahood. So, but I like to study the debate. I like to study the philosophy. When I was kid, and I just follow my passion. That time I just follow my passion. So I studied. So sometimes like that. So sometimes you should follow your passion, what you like to do. Sometimes I know that sometimes your families, they want you to do something and to find a good job and a big balance in the bank. That normally all the families, all the parents, they want to do that. But the one thing I learned that even you might have the good job, even you might have a big balance in the bank, it might not help you make more happy. So you have to follow your passion and to try to do something that makes you really happy, which really makes you happy. That's, I think, the most important. Thank you.
Thank you, Rinpoche. And so we will move on to our next presenter and then have more questions at the end of that. Okay, so please have your questions written down. So, hello, so that you don't forget your question. So next presenter we have Venerable Tugu Tenzin Gyume Rinpoche. So would you mind we do at the end of the presentation so that we'll have a big time for the more questions altogether. So our next presenter is a Venerable Tugu Tenzin Gyume Rinpoche, and Rinpoche was born in 1981 in Meon Tawang, Arunachal Pradesh, India. In 1990, at the age of 9, he formally joined Sjbccny Monastery in Bailakuppe, South India. The following year, when His Holiness the Dalai Lama visited Gyume Tantric College, Rinpoche was recognized as a reincarnated Lama and also subsequently recognized both at Sjbccny Monastery, Bailakuppe, and Ganden Namgyeling Hlatse Monastery in Meon Tawang. From 1991 to 1998, he studied at the Sjbccny Secondary School and completed his secondary school certificate. And in 1998, on completion of formal schooling, he began his advanced philosophical and dialectical training and studied at Sjbccny Monastery. So Rinpoche studied for over 20 years at the Sjbccny Monastic University for Geshe degree program, and currently he is in his final years of 6 years of Geshe Haramba examination. And Rinpoche also founded the Thubten Shedubling Foundation, a non-profit organization providing free education to the underprivileged ones in Tawang in northern eastern part of India. So with that, I take the pleasure to present Rinpoche.
Thank you. Tashtile and good afternoon to everyone. I wanted to start with telling you about, in my understanding, one of the major accomplishments of Lama Tsongkhapa. Professor Thurman has touched many important points in his presentation. I feel that the great learning centers that we have in Tibet, after him, first Ganden Monastery, then Drebung and Sera, and subsequently they are established in India now. So the system of education institutions, especially studying Buddhist philosophical studies for many years, with these special techniques, which involves first the memorization of the root texts, then studying the commentaries, and also more and more commentaries, going to your teacher for lectures on those particular topics, and then study those topics in depth through a special debating Tibetan style. And I feel that that is really a great invention, in some way we can say, of Lama Tsongkhapa. I'm not saying that these kind of studies and institutions were not there before. If you look at the history of Tibet in 7th century, during King Songtsen Gampo, and especially during King Tizong Dorjen in Tibet also, there were especially study centers, meditation centers, translation centers, so which involves really a lot of critical studies. It happened even during that time. And also, when you read the biography of Lama Tsongkhapa, even Lama Tsongkhapa himself studied in many of the great learning centers, especially in central Tibet at that time, mostly in the Sajja traditions. But it seems from Lama Tsongkhapa's life story that at that time there are not many such great institutions in other part of Tibet. And so therefore he has to come all the way from the eastern Tibet where he was born to the central Tibet for studies. But though even at that time, so if you get a chance to read Lama Tsongkhapa's biography, especially now Jimbala's great work, at that time, it seems that the study of epistemology, especially the Tsema, was quite popular in Tibet at that time, and also the profession of wisdom studies, Persian, was quite prevalent in Tibet at that time. But when it comes to the study of Madhyamika philosophy, Lama Tsongkhapa himself has faced so much difficulties even to receive an oral transmission from a teacher. He found it very rare. So even in, so nowadays, so after Lama Tsongkhapa, when he found Ganden Monastery, and after that, when the study of the 5 treatises started to come into being, and especially nowadays how the monks, the students study in these great learning centers, I feel that is one of the greatest achievement of Lama Tsongkhapa still, and something which we have to preserve, work on how to preserve and continue that in coming years. The reason why I told you that when I first started my journey into Sjbccny monastery, as I was 9 years old at that time, and I have no idea why I came to Sarah. My father just sent me to join the monastery and say, if you go to the monastery, you will get a lot of things to play and so and so. But that was not true. There was nothing to play. So the first few days I joined the monastery, I had to learn the Tibetan alphabet reading. Tibetan alphabet we have to read a lot. Read very aloud, especially through our teachers, and that helps us to read the scriptures very fast and with very accuracy. And as time moves on, it helps you also to acquire the skill of memorizations. So to master the skill of memorization in Tibetan Buddhist traditions, you need to be very well versed, especially with reading the scripts very fast. So that is the technique that I was told in the first 2 or 3 years, and it's still continuing all over the Tibet and in India and the major monasteries. Then later, then we start the memorizations, and when I started study of the philosophical, when I joined the main monastery, so the first topic that we study in the monastery was about the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the perfection of wisdom, and I memorized Tangundokin, and so in the first class that I joined, our teacher tell us about the classifications of the texts, how for example, if you look at the Lord Buddha's own words, so there are over 100 volumes of the direct transmissions of Lord Buddha, Kangyur, and there's over 200 the commentary on the sutras. So totally it's around 300 volumes. So it may not be possible for someone to study all of that in a short period of time. So my teacher told us that So these texts, so when you study the text, usually they're grouped into two based on the content. So the first one, of course, the profound wisdom, and then the great extensive part, which is the Yachiwe Lamgirimba. So these two. So based on these two contents, all the texts are grouped, classified in a very in a very secular way, so that when you start your study at the university, it gives you a very clear picture, and also how to design the whole course. It helps a lot. So that is basically about the classifications. So then the classification of these texts into the wisdom part, which is the profound wisdom. For example, Lord Buddha's almost all the texts on Prajnaparamita Sutra, then Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdoms, if you look at, then Lama Tsongkhapa's the great works on profound view, his 5 important texts. So all these are based on the profound wisdom. Then there are other texts which are more towards the extensive parts. So these two tell us that if you have to tell us the whole classification of these texts into just 2 words, it is actually the compassion and the wisdom. The compassion representing the great extensive part, which involves all the other practices, and the ultimate wisdom. And wisdom here doesn't necessarily means your own intellectual capacity, but it's more about understanding the reality, understanding the truth. So in order to understand the truth or the reality, you need to have the perseverance, you need to have the concentration, you need to rely on ethical discipline. So that's how even the 6 perfections were brought into order. The 5 perfections first, and the wisdom was kept at the 6th. So coming back to the point of compassion and wisdom, so these 2 topics or the contents actually form the foundations of all these important texts and the studies that we do over so many years back at the monastery. So then I found after many years that why it was so much important to write texts on compassion and wisdom, or the extensive part and the profound view. Is there direct connection between the content of those texts and our real life? As a human being, when we live our life in a daily way, what are the connections? Is something topic, if it is something not really related to your life, how can those teachings, how can those studies benefit you in some way? I think that then I've realized when I attend the many teachings of His Holiness and others, realized that compassion and the wisdom are actually the basic foundations of our human existence, our human's evolution, and they are the main principles in our life. When we first start our journey into this life, we, as a baby, in order to survive, even for a few minutes or a few hours, we rely on our mother's compassions. And then we also, our mothers and our parents' capacity to discern what is right and wrong, to distinguish. So compassion and wisdom is actually applied from the day 1 of our journey into this life. It is something very practical. It is something which is present in all the activities that we do in our life. So therefore, there is a bridge, there is a link between what we do in our life and what we study. So the important thing is, as Lama Tsongkhapa himself says, that first you have to study the text, the content, and later you have to contemplate on those, and ultimately you have to put them into practice. So these are the simple words of Lama Tsongkhapa himself. So there is directly a connection between our daily life and what Lama Tsongkhapa has been teaching, and not just Lama Tsongkhapa, the whole teachings of the Lord Buddha. There is a direct connection I found. Now, second one, when I spoke about studying the middle way philosophy, I feel that Lama Tsongkhapa has really done a special service to the preservation of the Lord Buddha's teaching in the field of middle way philosophy by writing the commentaries on the middle way philosophy. And that is really something, we can even consider that as jewels of all the Tibetan literatures that we can find nowadays. And when we start in our monastery, when we study the medieval philosophy, we start with Lama Tsongkhapa's work on entering the medieval philosophy. So it's actually a commentary on Chandrakriti's entering the medieval philosophy. So the first chapter that we study, it speaks about compassion to be the origin of all the qualities of bodhisattvas. So that is the topic that we study for the first few months. Then when I read Gompa Rapsel and also the other commentaries, Lama Jizumbe's commentary, Panchen Sonam Daba's commentary, and all the other commentaries written on that topic, and they all stress upon the point that for the bodhisattvas, the three main qualities that are present in a bodhisattva to become enlightened is the first compassion, then wisdom realizing emptiness, and ultimately is the bodhicitta. So with these three qualities, but both the wisdom realizing emptiness and the bodhicitta, they too in turn has to rely on compassion as the base. So that tells us a very important thing, that even starting to be on the line of enlightenment for the bodhisattvas, compassion is the base. So this ultimately tells us that compassion seems to be the base and the foundations for everyone in this world. So therefore, I think I'm running out of time. So nowadays, not just for the monastic institutions, there are many curriculums and there are many programs all over the world study of teaching compassions. And I personally feel that for the kindergartens and for the elementary schools, we should be just teaching compassions for the first few years. And just few years before, we do not have any such programs, but nowadays we have wonderful programs from Sea Learning and also 16 guidelines in Jimbala's Compassion Institutes. So the coming generations, the coming decades will be really have to pay a lot of importance on how to teach compassions. And the good thing about the compassion and the wisdom is that it can be taught, it can be taught, even to the young kids. And it is also contagious. If you teach one kid, so that kid can, that kind of ripple effects can spread a whole society. So that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rambuchela. And I think we have time for only one question. So most of our presenters today will be here tomorrow. And please have your questions written, and then you will have the opportunity tomorrow for sure. So I think there's someone over here who has a question. Oh, over there.
So my name is John. I have the great privilege and honor of being one of Kangche Rinpoche's students, and would just like to thank all the presenters and audience for joining us today in what is really a wonderful afternoon. You might have noticed some cameras around today, part of which are making a feature film about Tibetan Buddhism in the modern world. And I'd like to inform the audience, if I may, that Kangche Rinpoche will be teaching this Monday evening from 7 to 9 at the Tibet House in Manhattan, the title of which is Sympathetic Joy, How to Take Pleasure in and Draw Inspiration from the Success and Happiness and Virtues of Others during the holidays. I'd also like to encourage everyone to visit DIPKAR, that's DIPKAR.org. This is Kangche Rinpoche's foundation website, where you can see some of the incredible work he's doing, including a new monastery in Nepal for many of the children left without families after the recent earthquakes. If anyone has any questions, please speak with me after the conference, and thank you very much for being with us today.
If it's possible, what would you think would be the best way to begin teaching compassion to a 5-year-old? Could you please make a suggestion where you would start? Thank you.
Sorry, can you repeat?
Oh, yeah. What do you think would be the best way to begin teaching compassion to a 5-year-old in a school setting? Because you mentioned that at the end of your talk.
Teaching compassion to?
A 5-year-old.
Oh, okay. So I have a part on that actually. So due to the time restraints, I was not able to do that. I always believe that for the children, we do not need to teach anything. We have to only show them. And so the children, they have the capacity to copy and imitate what they see in front of them. So the best way to teach compassion to a 5-year kid is the parents or whoever looks after the kids, they have to behave compassionately. I was talking to my friend, my host here in Queens in New York, that he was talking about how to make sure that his kids have inherited the Tibetan culture. And I asked him how you do that, and he says it's so difficult to teach them about how to make the water bowl offerings, how to do prostrations. They won't do it. I said, do you do it? He says, sometimes. So I feel that if the parent themselves keep on doing that every day, making 7 bowl water bowl offerings, for example, speaking from Tibetan cultural point of view, and making prostrations and lighting incense. I think lighting incense may have some problem here with the fire departments. But apart from that, if the parents do that, the kids, they will automatically copy it. That is what I believe. Thank you.
So now we have a short tea break. So until 2, I think a tea break is at 2:15. So 2:15, we will resume the second part of the session. So we'll come back at 2:15. Thank you.
Hello. Solo de la reunión yo con la ya de San José
We have a tea at the corner, at left side, corner left side. And this is the Sjbccny. Tana Foundation is the Sjbccny now, so come check don't. Ane Tana Foundation is Lama Tsawala Tuche na shirts. We have received a donation 1,000 from Tana Foundation. Thanks for Tana Foundation Director Lama Tsawang. Thank you. Bobby Nasir. Lagi lo sama dulu.
Sonia la chila chari ko ya soya la chari chang me ko la la no bu shu la soya la kundu kunyu shu la la no bu shu la soya la kundu kunyu shu la Sonia la lesa nobili la soya la nobu mindu na so Chusha ishi no la soya la nobu mena kare Chusha ishi no la soya la nobu mena kare
This Black Friday weekend, find exclusive gear you can only get at Guitar Center, like the new Fender.
Hello. Number two, Khalid Ma Kushu Narona, any Kama Kashichin Ganzu, Ningu Jabki, so doing you the Unzu Shui. Hello. In few minutes, we are going to resume the second session of this afternoon. So please have your seats. No, you go there. You go. Yes, I think, yeah, it's about 20 minutes, yeah. 25 to 35. I guess, yeah, we can do about